Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Africa Clean Energy Technical Assistance Facility Gender and Social Inclusion webinar that is focusing on Southern Africa. We would like to welcome everybody and to maybe just mention that for us to have an easier time, let's all try to turn off our video just so that we can all ensure that we are not eating up the bandwidth, and also just make sure that your microphone, if you're not asking any burning question or presenting, is turned off for the meantime. So I will invite Dr. Margaret Wanjiku, who is our moderator for today, to take us through the introductory bit and invite everybody else so that we can actually get on our way. Thank you very much. My name is Victor Olo. I'm the Communications Manager for A-Staff. Karibuni sana to the webinar.
Okay. Thank you very much, Victor, and welcome everybody to the webinar. My name is Margaret Wanjiku. I work as a Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor for the A-Staff. So in this webinar, we are going to discuss issues related to gender and social inclusion, particularly how to, the various ways that inclusion of the vulnerable groups has been done, particularly in the Southern African region. But before we go very far, I would like to invite our country manager, Doreen, to give us an overview of what the ACE program is. Doreen, please.
Thank you very much, Margaret. My name is Doreen Chipikabwalia. I'm country manager for Zambia. So the Africa Clean Energy Technical Assistance Facility is a 4-year program that aims to catalyze a market-based approach for private sector delivery of renewable energy electrification technologies with a specific focus on standalone solar. This program is funded by the UK Government Department for International Development, DFID, and also seeks to follow up on the Energy Africa Compacts. The program is in 14 countries in Africa, and in Southern Africa, we are in 4 countries, in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique. A-Staff complements government, private sector, and donor initiatives to overcome many of the barriers preventing the development of markets for high-quality standalone solar systems. This will result in increased access to reliable energy, resulting also in better well-being and livelihood opportunities for the poor and marginalized people. In terms of our areas of work, we have 3 pillars. The first one is supporting, creating an enabling environment. This is basically assisting governments to put in place appropriate policies and regulations that support market development. Also, another pillar is knowledge management. Here, we generate and disseminate knowledge and evidence on the success factors for private sector delivery of off-grid solar energy across Africa. Then the third pillar is coordination. We are looking to promote coordination with other relevant donor initiatives, and also coordination in different countries so that all the donor initiatives are coordinated as well. So specifically coming to the countries in Southern Africa, the areas where we're working, there are several themes, but several themes are common. One is we support rural electrification authorities and solar association. We also promote innovation in consumer financing. As we also promote quality standards and work with the standard bureaus to ensure that there are quality standards within the countries. And lastly, the other recurring theme in the countries we are looking at today is that of providing clarity on taxation issues for solar components. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Doreen. So our audience, you'll be pleased to note that the program has prioritized gender and social inclusion, and this is why we are holding this series of webinars. Recently, we developed a handbook, Gender and Social Inclusion Handbook, and in it, we have detailed, some of the things that the different players within the renewable energy industry can do to enhance gender and social inclusion. Next, Victor. Perhaps before I go on, let me say that in this webinar, we are going to have speakers from the Southern African region. I will introduce them briefly, but then when they begin to speak, they'll take a few moments and tell us more about themselves and what they do. So we will have Lilian, who is the CEO of Weed Energy Weed Energy Africa Limited from Zambia. We will have, after that, Benny Sidono, who is the gender focal point for the Ministry of Energy, again from Zambia. We are also happy to be joined by Chandi Mutubuki Makuyana, a renewable energy consultant from Zimbabwe. And we will also have Dr. Margaret Jirambo Matinga, who is the founder and MD for Dunamai Energy in Malawi. So I'll take a few minutes and introduce the big program, the big aspects of the program, as well as what is contained in our Gender and Social Inclusion Handbook. And then we will listen to the specific case studies from our speakers. Next, Victor. Next slide. Okay, so the purpose of this webinar is to, Victor, I think you've moved on, sorry. Yes, the purpose of this webinar is to discuss, as I've said, the gender and social inclusion issues in off-grid solar, and how, again, realizing that we are operating within the context of COVID-19, the coronavirus disease, what are some of the issues of, very specific to gender and social inclusion in the energy sector within this context. We'll also look at how this gender and social inclusion can be, can feature in the various activities of different players. And when you think about the players in the renewable energy industry, you have the government, you have the private sector, you have the non-profit organizations, including CBOs, NGOs, and so on, and you have the and you have the donors, the financiers of these activities. So what are the various different things they can do to enhance gender and social inclusion? And as I've mentioned, we are going to have to listen to very specific case studies from the countries I've mentioned, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. Next, please. So gender and social inclusion, sometimes when you mention gender, there's always the tendency for a lot of people to think that gender is synonymous with women. But this is not the case. Within the ACE TAF program, for us, gender, when you talk about gender and social inclusion, this is inclusive for us of women, women in low-income households, particularly, ensuring their interests are taken on board in the interventions and the programs. Others in this category would be youth, particularly those who are jobless. It includes also people with disabilities, internally displaced persons, nomadic populations, and so on. I think the big picture is vulnerable or potentially excluded groups within the various spaces that we are operating. And remember that, again, this concept of gender and social inclusion is also locality specific, in the sense that we have pastoralist regions, we have others where we have internally displaced persons, and so on. The poverty and the class issues are also a feature here. So when we talk about gender and social inclusion, we adopt the more comprehensive concepts of these excluded groups. Next, please. Victor. So when you talk about gender and social inclusion within the context, we have the various experiences that we continue to see. So for example, the delays in supplies, for example, in the energy, because of the restrictions, because of limited flights and movements, what does this mean? When you talk about reduced family incomes, when you think about increased demand for energy, now that a lot of people are operating from home, so this again drives the need for energy, as well as the already limited family incomes are even further stretched. Reduced access to financing, when you think about the businesses, as you all recognize around us, we are in a constrained economic kind of context with the COVID issues. You've heard about increased cases of gender-based violence with the restricted movements and the lockdowns. So these are specific things that we need to be awake to. And when we listen to our speakers later on, we'll hear how this is impacting in the different spaces within our countries in Southern Africa. Next, please, Victor. So when you think about the various actors, for example, the government, what we have in our Gender and Social Inclusion Handbook, we have tried to highlight the various things that the different actors can do. So when you think about the government as one of the major actors, of course, we know that one of their the roles of the government institutions is setting the policy agenda, and it is our belief that where this policy agenda also adopts gender and social inclusion, then this will be streamlined, within the other activities of the other actors. One of the biggest challenges that we face in the industry is lack of gender disaggregated data. And in this case, we are talking about data that is disaggregated by gender, by age, by disability, and so on. So there is very specific roles that the government can play in enhancing gender and social inclusion within the industry. The private sector is a big employer. It is providing the solutions, and the innovations and so on. So there are again certain things that the private sector can do to enhance gender and social inclusion, including ensuring that the recruitment and the employment policies within the companies are gender cognizant, to enhance again employment and incomes. Donors and investors have a big role to play, including not just availing the financing with a gender lens, but also ensuring that technical assistance to a company that is also provided. The role of NGOs and also in terms of advocacy to ensure that the vulnerable regions and the forgotten regions get attention, is also remembered. So we will hear more of this when we listen to the case studies. And now, next, Victor. Now I'll invite the speakers. But before I do that, I would like to draw your attention to the side chat we have on the webinar, where please feel free to send your questions. We will look at them during the presentations. We have also provided a link, and this will be also pasted. I'm requesting my colleague Victor to paste a link on the side chat so that you can access the handbook, and then you can get more of the details. So we will now go to the speakers, my colleague, the speakers, and we are giving them about 15 minutes each to briefly introduce themselves and go into their topic. And then after this, after each speaker, we will take a few questions that are specific to that speaker, so that then we can respond to them as we go. And finally, towards the end, depending on how we manage time, we will then have a big engagement. So thank you very much for this. I am encouraging you to join us to engage as we go. Please mute your mics.
Then we saw
okay, thank you. So Lillian, please go on with your presentation.
And for example, another 500 in West Africa.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Lillian. I am the CEO and the co-founder of Wide Energy. And Wide Energy means in full women initiative for delivering clean energy. And the correction that it's wide energy, not weed energy. Sorry about that. I live and work in Zambia, where 72% of Zambians have no access to electricity. Wide Energy focuses on the lending portfolio and the distribution network. We offer the affordable path to the electrification with our pay-as-you-go solar solution for the off-grid areas. In this, we recruit and train young girls, young boys, young and vibrant in the rural communities as sales agents. These sales agents do the door-to-door selling of our products, and they earn a living through a commission that is based on their sales or their targets. Our mission is to empower the women to become the champions and the advocates of clean energy. We have women that I would describe as the backbone of our households, and they are the crucial drive to our economic growth. If maybe only they could be given the equal opportunities, equal access to financial support and other opportunities. Today, I am excited to be part of this webinar on gender and social inclusion, which is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I would like to thank S for the S and the organizers for the invitation. And I can start with the presentation on the slides. We are located in Zambia, in Southern Africa. Lusaka is where our headquarters are. Wide Energy was created in 2016, where we started with a sale of Pico Solar products. That time we were still doing a business on cash basis. In 2018, we pivoted to solar home system, which are the pay-as-you-go. We are located in 3 provinces, Lusaka, Central, and Eastern Province, as you can see on the map. And within those provinces, we are in different districts. In our business, we started by opening up 1 service center at a time and grew from one to the next one, learning from the mistakes maybe made from the first time and then going into the next one. We are in the eastern part of Zambia, where we have 3 service centers, and then we opened up new ones in the Central Province in Kabwe and Serenge. Thank you, Victor. Yes, so the problem of lack of access of electricity in Zambia is real, just like many Southern Africa. We have 28% of Zambians that have access to electricity, and only 5% of them, of those are in rural areas. The pay-go model as it is has a tremendous potential, as we've seen in markets in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. But for markets that are vast territories like Zambia, and add to that a very low density, the grid access will simply not be able to reach some of the areas we are targeting. And to Wide Energy and to other players in the sector, this is a great opportunity to basically come in and impact and make a change in this gender and social inclusion in the off-grid areas. And this is where we are. This is why we are here for. This is what we are targeting in our business. Next slide, Victor. So this is what our business model look like. We focus on lending portfolio, as mentioned earlier. Our customer is offered a 10-watt solar home system package that is bundled with a mobile phone. He pays a down payment of 10%, which is in a way a commitment fee, and pays the balance in installments that go over 18 months with a weekly payment that is paid by mobile money. In future, through our strategic partners, which is Delight, we want to upsell to the advanced kits that will provide television, kit plus solar home system to our credible payers. These are customers that have finished up their first loan or customers that are about to finish their loan. Next slide, Victor. Sure, thank you. And this is what Wide Energy current employment status would look like. As I said, our mission is to empower the women, is to target that level of women in low-income households, those young, jobless youth that we are employing as sales agents. For full-term employees, we are at a 60% female versus a 40% male. And we have our sales agents ratio, which is at 69% male versus a 31% female. And the team leaders, maybe to go back to what is the team leader's role in this? It's the team leaders are the ones in each service centers. They are in charge of the sales agents. They recruit, they train, and they visit them frequently. The ratio is pretty unbalanced, with 89% of male as 83% and 17% of female. This is mostly because these team leaders, the job involves movement a lot within the region, within the field. In the field, they would spend long hours away from their homes most of the times in different areas. And this is what has maybe brought the huge imbalance between the male and female in this sector. We've had to challenge ourselves, bring in team leader, female team leader, to see if we could break down this imbalance and challenge ourselves to see that women can also do this type of take up this type of role. Thank you. Next, Victor. Thanks. Yes, so how is the current gender and societal conditions in most of these rural areas? As in other regions of, we've seen that women do not have the same opportunities as men, especially where energy is concerned. They have no or little participation of women in the household decision making. The husband will purchase the kit and make the decision. They are usually considered the heads of the household. And for this, the energy poverty that is generally affects women more than the men. And this brings all the increase in the adverse climate impacts. Their health are more vulnerable, their nutrition, their children's education, and so forth. Where is wide energy in this? What have we seen? What has changed since we took up this wide energy when we started, from the time we started to where we are now? We've seen how this has improved their lives. They have access to this affordable quality and access to the renewable energy. They've increased the time they spent with their kids. The kids' home hours are longer, and this increases the chances of success in school. Therefore, in the long term, they will have a better chance to life, to have important roles in the society. And this also has given them a chance to have access to mobile money, access to mobile financing. Most of these customers, this is their first actual loan that they've acquired, and we've seen that it has really improved how they tackle these challenges. They're saving more. They are aware of what is happening in their income, basically. We've seen an increase in women's businesses that has really changed their life. You have a tailor that will work longer hours because she has more hours of light. You have a bar owner or a restaurant owner, they work longer hours, that has increased their income that they are generating for their households. All this contributes to the closing the gap that we already know that is really existing in these communities and has given an improved living conditions. Next, Victor. Yes, so this brings me, that was the pre-COVID and now would like to talk more about how this has affected, how the crisis, how COVID has affected our customers, ourselves, and their livelihoods. Generally speaking, the access to clean energy solution has not been affected because our service centers have been open since, are still open and running. We are able to generate tokens for our customers because our call center is still operational as well. We depend a lot on our call center. It's still operational 7 days a week. Our customers are able to make the payment from the comfort of their homes because the payments are mostly made by mobile money. During this crisis, we've had to ensure, and we are happy that we've been able to have our customers are able to charge their phones, they're able to charge their radios, and basically able to access the crucial information and reliable from the radio or the phones that are usually given by the Ministry of Health on a regular basis. And this shows us how crucial and essential the business is. We've also, having said that, I would like to point out how, if the crisis goes longer, how all this will impact, one, the economy of the country, the farmers' economy. The farmers are 99% of our customers and our business scalability. We cannot ignore that all this will have a big impact on the foreign exchange fluctuation, and this, we buy our products in dollar and we sell them in Zambian kwacha. This will definitely affect the price that the customers are getting the kits for and make them more expensive. Yet the whole basis of this was to give the customer an affordable product, and it will impact on how many lives are we touching in the long run. Yeah, and this as well brings me to the fact that having to go through this, it also affects the funds of the company. Maybe we have to look for emergency funds all over. You have to go back and discuss with your creditors, with your suppliers, with your, for better favorable terms, for better payment modes and all that, to be able to sustain the progress that we've already achieved. While we wait for the dust to settle, we need to be ready for especially that we don't really know how long this is going to take. But bottom line, we have to ensure that when we get there, we are able to keep growing and stay valuable to our customers. Next. Yes, the first picture I would like is how we used to gather, how we used to meet with the different groups that we are trying to reach out to. This would be a typical women groups association that would meet. With the crisis, we are no longer able to gather. We are no longer able to meet with the different groups that were meeting before. We are not able to train more agents. We are not basically so many things of that involve gathering and meeting and being in one place that we are not able to do. It's the condition where we operate from are not conditions where you can do a lot of what the Western or here in the city we can do by working from home or connecting through the social media. It needs an interaction, a face-to-face interaction, and this is gonna have to go to decrease a lot. And we hope we'll be able to get out of this crisis soon so that we are able to get back to our businesses. The other picture is a proper picture of what the kits we are selling. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. I thank you. Thanks everyone for listening in.
Okay, thank you very much, Lillian, for your presentation. Very interesting and very informative. I think we've heard about some of their experiences, how they've expanded, and also we've appreciated your reflections on the circumstances within the COVID-19 and how it's affecting the expansion of the businesses. So Lillian, there are a few questions for you. I think you can take one or two, and then the rest we can discuss at the end. So we have a question from Pascal. Asking whether the solar home system package you're referring to is 10 watt or 10 kilowatt. I think that's just about clarity. And also asking whether it's to, is it pay to own or pay for only for energy use? And there are other questions from Mem Clancy. I hope you can see them on the side chat. Maybe you can respond to one or two, and then we can go to the next speaker in the interest of time.
Yes, sure. So if these pay as you go, are the customers paying? So our kids, they pay, it's a pay as you go. They pay a down payment and finish up the balance within a certain amount of time, maximum being 18 months. So it's unlocked once the payment has been fully paid. If that is clear, is Wide Energy having a change? We haven't had a change in the repayment terms due to COVID-19, but it's a case where we will have to monitor as we go. But so far, we've maintained our payment terms. I don't know which other one.
Okay. Yes, there's another one from Jackie Musonda from Rea Zambia, who is asking for more clarity on the 5%, when you mentioned that only 5% of the rural population has access to electricity. And there's another one also from Clancy, who is asking, when you talk about 10%, is it 10%? When you talk about 10% as a representative, or as the representation of part of low income, weekly, so I think also seeking clarity.
Okay, should I go ahead or respond on the side?
Okay.
Hello?
So we can proceed then. Okay, thank you, Lillian. Thank you for that. So next, our next speaker is Benny from the Ministry of Energy, who is the gender focal person. Benny, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benny Sidono from Zambia. I'm working for the Ministry of Energy, and I have the responsibility as a gender focal point for the ministry. I'm going to share with you a presentation which revolves around policy, probably sharing what we are trying to do to create a good policy environment to mainstream gender in the energy sector. Victor, next slide. Just to give you a country context, the last census population and housing that we had was in 2010, and currently Zamstat is in the process of doing the national census. But to give you a picture of our country, 2015 living conditions monitoring survey gives us the population to be around 15.5. Probably this time we're talking about 17, somewhere there. And 58.2% is rural, and 41.8% is urban. Then when you look at household heads, you find that 77.5% male-headed and 22% female-headed. The average size of the household is about 6. And we want to say that from the onset that the Zambian government is a signatory to several international laws and conventions that concern gender equality. And this has actually been used in various national plans and policies. So we could talk of the Vision 2030, which aims to create Zambia as a prosperous middle-income country by 2030. And then we talk about the 7th National Development Plan, which runs up to 2021. And there, the catch issue is accelerating development without leaving anyone behind. So already you find that issues of social inclusion and gender, when we talk about without leaving anyone behind, are quite paramount. There is a gender policy, which is a national gender policy of 2014, and currently the Ministry of Gender country is reviewing the policy to bring on board different issues that are emerging. In 2015, an act was enacted, which is a Gender Equity and Equality Act, which basically creates a platform or a framework to create an environment where there is gender equity and equality. We realize that gender is a social construct, and achieving gender equity sometimes becomes a challenge. So the Act simply creates an environment so that in different projects or programs, whatever is happening, gender concerns and social inclusion concerns are taken on board. Coming to the sector, we have a new energy policy, which was enacted, I think we launched early this year. It was crafted in the period of last year. So we're calling it the National Energy Policy 2019. I think this is a revision from the 2008 policy that we've been following. And currently, the ministry is developing a gender strategy and action plan with support from the European Union, the IREP project. It basically is to have a framework which is going to create, make it easy and bring all the actors in the energy sector to be able to implement gender equity and equality concerns in programs and projects. Next slide, Victor. I have not spoken about the picture. I'm sure Lillian did a good job to introduce the country and where it's seated. So obviously, to create a gender strategy, you need to know where you're coming from and what the situation is. So through the IREP project, through the support of the European Union, the ministry did a situation analysis, I think 2018, 2019, and the results of the analysis gives us a picture of gender in the energy sector, what is happening. So what we find is that probably up to now, the situation, the picture might not be so different. The energy for cooking has greatly been overlooked. And the other point is that there has been lack of disaggregated data for gender sensitive indicators. And maybe before I talk about data, I talk about the energy for cooking, saying that it has greatly been overlooked. Most of the solutions are solutions that simply have the aspect of lighting, yet cooking actually creates a for women who are often burdened because of the gender. The lack of sex disaggregated data and the gender sensitive indicators is something of concern, which the ministry, again, through the support of the European Union, the project is running. As we developed the gender strategy, this exercise has actually been affected because of COVID. Probably by this time, we should have had some reports and some data created, which give us information on energy access and utilization patterns in rural areas, because the study was commissioned. The other finding is that women benefit marginally from employment and work contracts. You find that for energy, there are a lot of projects that are implemented. But again, the extent of the benefits that we get and marginalized groups are also quite limited. There is gender-blind legislation and policy, but efforts, I'm sure, are underway to actually mainstream and bring gender on board in different policy documents. The other finding or result was that there's improved gender balance on boards, number of women in the workforce, especially in the energy sector, mostly being driven by STEM. So that's another challenge probably that needs to be looked at. And lastly, there's limited institutional capacity to mainstream gender in the sector. Probably the issue here is the focus. We want to ask questions about how do we ensure that the practical needs of women and men are actually achieved as we implement these energy projects. So that process is probably the capacity that the assessment is speaking to. Next slide, Victor.
Ben, you have 3 more minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk about interventions in energy projects, what's the role of policy? What lessons can we talk about? Broadly speaking, the RIA projects, we can talk about certain experiences. For example, targeting is important. Example from increasing access projects that they have been implementing, where thresholds are put, where they need to target reaching women-headed households in emergency access projects, and also in decision-making, where you talk about community mobilization structures at community level, where they create committees and they encourage women to participate in those committees, the presence following certain thresholds that are embedded in policy. And probably, though not enforceable, but encourage contractors to consider gender when employing unskilled labor. That's another aspect that could be considered, or that they actually consider along the way and encourage their contractors. Another example to share is the Beyond the Grid project. I think they also have just targets embedded in contracts of companies contracted by the project. And basically, those not casting iron on stone, they encourage them so that once they follow through, those companies are seen to be good partners and the endpoints. And then maybe another lesson is to encourage, more needs to be done to encourage women to take up more technical roles in the industry or in the sector, probably installations, repairs, etc. Next slide, Victor. So moving forward, some recommendations from the assessment include that there's more need to focus on gender responsive procurement. And we also need to have mechanisms for gender responsive budgeting from the start. And probably we need to have checklists and tools for gender mainstreaming in projects. And we need to have internal gender mainstreaming issues to do with policies within organizations. And lastly, and not the least, is to incorporate gender when revising policy documents. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benny, for your presentation and giving us that perspective from the Ministry of Energy. I think you've highlighted very interesting and very important perspectives on gender, particularly in the area of energy. I think I noted also when you talked about women, and this is something we see constantly, shying away from technical roles in renewable energy jobs, and also recommending that there should be gender responsive procurement and employment. and also gender considerations in policy revision. So thank you for that, Benny. I'm looking on the side, and I don't think we have a question for you at this point. Maybe it will come later. At this point, let me invite our next speaker, and this is Chandi. Next, please.
Thank you, Margaret. My name is Chandi Tubuki Makuyana. I'm a renewable energy consultant, and I've experience working in various countries in Southern Africa, including Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana. And I'm an accountant by profession, but my experience and expertise is in designing and developing financing and business models for ensuring sustainability in rural areas. My presentation, next slide, Victor, thank you. So I'm going to take a different angle from my other two colleagues who spoke earlier. I'm focusing or I'm zeroing in on specific projects that have been implemented in two areas. One is Mashava Solar Mini Grid, which is in Gwanda district in Zimbabwe. And the other one is a project called Solar Fin to Go in Jamataka village in Botswana. The two projects are at the borders of Zimbabwe and Botswana. So they are sort of like in the flip side of the two countries. Jamataka is a village which is about 40 kilometers from Francistown, the second largest city in Botswana, and the project is funded by Innovate UK and is being implemented by various stakeholders, including DP Sun, Ulster University, and BUST. And then the Mashava Solar Mini Grid project ended in February 2019, which is last year, and it was an EU-funded project done by Practical Action as the lead partner, together with SNV Netherlands Development Organization and Dabane Trust. The Mashava Solar Mini Grid project was part of the SE for RC project, the Sustainable Energy for Rural Communities project, which was being done in Zimbabwe and in Malawi. Next slide, please. So what the projects were aiming to do was basically to come up with community-owned models, energy delivery models for rural communities. The thinking behind the project was that rural communities are diverse and they are different, and they've got certain characteristics that may favor one business model or one energy delivery model over another energy delivery model. So what that picture is actually representing are the different types of models or energy access delivery models that were implemented in the rural communities. One of them will be access to household electricity through energy kiosks. And the energy kiosks are just basically retail shops that sell energy products like solar lights, solar home systems, and other solar products. And the reason why energy kiosks and not per se maybe a mini grid is that the populations in the areas that I'm talking about are very dispersed. You can go for about 2 kilometers without actually seeing a household. So the cost of a mini grid with a grid network becomes very expensive compared to having, when compared to what actually people use the electricity for, which at times when you start off is electricity for lighting and at times also electricity for refrigeration, which services can be more economically developed for these communities rather than other models. So what was basically put in place was access to household electricity through energy kiosks, and then access to learning facilities, offline learning facilities through what we were calling study center model. And the study centers that were in place at the time of the project were powered by the mini-grid, but some were also powered by energy kiosks. Then there was also water for productive use at irrigation schemes for food security, basically to enhance mini-grids, to enhance communities' incomes. This was done through mini-grids mostly, but there were also community gardens which bought solar water pumping systems from the energy kiosks. And then there was a project that the communities had started on their own, which was not actually part of the project per se, but what they wanted was electricity from the mini-grid for them to power piped water to communities in Mashaba through a pipeline. By the time the project ended, they were still rehabilitating the power of the pipeline. And then also the two organizations, Practical Action and SNV, were keen on employing the Energia international models of not only looking at the welfare issues of energy or the energy welfare goal, but to also look at issues to do with empowerment and equity. And one of the key issues that they were keen to promote was making sure that the women were involved not only from accessing energy, but also from being providers of energy services to the communities that they lived in. So the focus was also in making sure that at least 50% of the businesses, of the service providers, energy kiosks themselves and the energy centers and part of the mini-grid ownership was also with women and youth. Women and youths were being promoted therefore as energy entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. Next slide, Victor. Thank you. So the Mashaba Solar Mini Grid project had, on the left, you see the load centers that the project was promoting. It was the mini grid itself was one of the models, which was a 99 kilowatt system, solar mini grid system. And you see that the load centers, the black spot at the bottom there is the plant where the mini grid was. And then the black dotted lines represent the mini grid network distribution. It was about 25 kilometers of grid network. And the point of the mini grid was to power productive use of energy in the system, in the area. The three green blocks were the 3 irrigation schemes, and then the orange dots were the business centers. The blue was the clinic, and the red is the primary school. And what also was exciting during the project implementation was that a new border post opened up about 8 kilometers from the mini grid, and that's the purple dot on the corner. The Shashe River is actually the border for Botswana and Zimbabwe on that side, and this community was within the confluence of Shashe and Tule River. And some of the energy entrepreneurs were young women like Butle Ngwenya, who is on the right, and that was her energy kiosk. Yes, next slide, please, Victor. So some of the products that the energy centers were actually selling, the energy kiosks were selling, were solar lights, solar lighting systems, solar home systems, solar water pumps, solar ions, solar panels and their batteries, as well as solar refrigerators. I will not dwell much on that because the type of models that was implemented is similar to the one that Lillian described, where the communities were using pay-as-you-go and using mobile money. So I'll move on to how access to electricity had both positive and negative impacts on COVID. Sorry, let me say that again. How access to electricity has positive impacts during COVID-19 measures. So we noticed that the ownership and management structures that had been put up in the mini-grid systems, as well as the other energy access models, was such that they were locally owned and operated. So access to electricity on these facilities was not disrupted. And the revenue collection methods for them were prepaid meters, and the option was also to pay through mobile money. And since the lockdown measures involved the lockdown and people not being able to move, the mobile systems were actually a benefit. The feature was actually beneficial. Some of the communities also had pay-as-you-go payments for electricity on their systems that they had, the Delight solar home systems. So that also continued. Entrepreneurship, women energy kiosks owners in Gwanda and also Jamataka continued to have their incomes from pay-as-you-go payments for gadgets that were already sold. But I would like to emphasize that the incomes for the energy entrepreneurs, much of their incomes, about 75%, were sale of new products, not necessarily incomes from pay-as-you-go systems. So as much as they continue to receive about 25% of the, as much as they continue to receive the pay-as-you-go payments, that only contributes about 25% of the income that they were already getting. So the incomes, their incomes would have reduced by close to about 75%. And then mobile phone charging services are available because most of the communities, by the time the project finished in Mashaba, about 65% to 70% of the households had solar lights and solar home systems that had also charging facilities. So for that reason, these communities also had they have access to mobile charging services, and they have information about the COVID measures that government is implementing. Yeah. In Jamataka, sorry.
You have 3 minutes. Sorry to interrupt, Chandi.
Okay, I'm almost done. In Jamataka, not much negative effects have been felt, except that the communities were receiving drought relief from money for drought relief from the government, and this was put on hold a week before lockdown. So villagers started having challenges with food provision. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, sorry, yeah. So then the negative effects on Masha is that in all the other communities that are selling solar products is that most of the products are imports from other countries, mostly South Africa, Botswana, China. So when borders closed, these communities are affected because they can't import these products. Hence that reduction in the 75% that I was talking about on income. And most of the border communities also rely on remittances from family members in other countries. So lockdown means also remittances in terms of groceries and money from those family members also stopped. Most of the communities are also cross-border traders, which means that they buy and sell products from South Africa and other countries, and they come and sell in Zimbabwe. And then with the borders closing, that is also affected their source of income. Access to affordable potable water is a challenge because water reticulation systems were not yet completed. Most of the water points, both in Jamataka and in Mashawa, are communal water points. So the issue of social distancing is actually difficult to implement. But one of the community members, one of the teachers at Jamataka, Mr. Shakes, we call him Shakes, he's also part of the project for Solar Fin to Go, was designing and setting up contact-free hand washing facilities and volunteering within the community. He actually received a Commonwealth recognition by the Queen of England recently. the main challenge that we have actually been seeing because of COVID is that rural schools do not have infrastructure for online learning. Most urban schools have actually gone to online learning, and they need infrastructure such as smartphones, laptops, even Wi-Fi and data bundles, which is quite expensive. As much as the project itself had implemented e-learning facilities, they were offline because of the issues of challenges of data bundles. And we realized that the issue of education is actually not been addressed, and it's a major issue that has affected the communities where electricity is concerned. Thank you very much. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Chandi, for your presentation and that very interesting perspective from Zimbabwe. I think we've seen about the energy, the different energy delivery models for the rural communities, and you have explained how these have taken root in each of the areas where the projects are. Also, I think you've highlighted the essence of building youth and women's agency as energy entrepreneurs. I think that was another important highlight, as well as the positive impact of electricity in the current context of COVID. So thank you very much, Chandi, for that. I'm again looking at the side chat, and I don't see any question for you at the moment. I guess we keep checking, and then we can respond to them later on. I think at this point, let me take this moment and invite our last speaker today, Dr. Margaret from Malawi. Margaret, please.
Thank you very much. First to the organizers of this webinar, but also to all the participants for joining in. My name is Maggie Matinga, Margaret, but everybody calls me Maggie. And I am from Malawi, although at the moment I'm based in the UK. I am founder and director of Dunamai Energy, and we're a small outfit based in Malawi. And what we do mostly is research and advocacy, but also policy advisory and program development. I am going to, just looking to do this slide, but I am going to talk about mostly COVID and the experiences that are emerging from Malawi. But I would also believe in learning from past successes and mistakes. And in this sense, I am going to also draw from some examples, specifically from Nepal, which had a disaster 5 years ago now in 2015, where you can draw parallels to the experiences with COVID at the moment. Victor, can I have my screen? Hello?
Victor?
Yes, Maggie, just giving you control.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second.
Whilst Victor is doing that, I'll talk a little bit more about my background. So I started life as a mechanical engineer, but sort of ending life as an anthropologist. And I really came into the whole issue of gender and social inclusion by meeting some very, very interesting people from Nigeria, which I'm sure most of the people here have encountered, the energy network on gender, the international network of on gender and energy, and that's how I entered the gender and energy space. And so in the case study where I draw from experiences from Nepal, some of those experiences are from research that we did through Nigeria, but this was also funded by DFID in Nepal, and we did that research in the field work itself. The research started in 2014, but the field work itself was in 2017. But even though 2017 was 2 years after the massive earthquake in Nepal, the impacts and the implications on energy and on gender were still very much raw, were still very much being felt in Nepal.
Do we have the presentation now?
I do not see it.
Or maybe in the interest of time, Victor, you can run it. Yeah.
Yeah, you run it. Victor,
hi Maggie.
fine.
I will just I will have to run it because for some technical reason I'm not. It's not allowing me to give you
that's
control.
Fine.
So
right.
Kindly just allow me to run through it for you. I will try as much as possible to make sure that I give you a good enough piece.
That's all right. So the first thing I want to provide a little bit of context, of the COVID and coronavirus situation in Malawi, because it's slightly different from other countries. As of last week, we have 58 confirmed cases, and this should be taken with a pinch of salt because we haven't tested a lot. We have had less than 1,500 tests. So 58 confirmed cases, but with that caveat that we haven't tested as extensively as we would have wanted to. We do not have a lockdown, unlike Zimbabwe and most other countries around the world, because when that was proposed, it was legally challenged by some of the civil society organizations, and there were protests because it was not rights-based. So it goes directly to the issue of gender and social inclusion. It was not consultative, and of course it was affecting the poorest who live hand to mouth and who cannot really afford to lock down. One of the most visible impacts of that is that overnight public transport costs doubled because they reduced the number of people that can be in a minibus, or matatus as you call them in Kenya, to reduce overcrowding. And of course that has had a knock-on effect on costs of basic goods and services, and on people's ability to travel, and businesses' ability to transport goods or to interact with customers. And the other thing is that all this in Malawi is happening. I know COVID is very, very big everywhere else in the world, but probably the biggest thing right now in Malawi is the political situation. If you're tuned to Malawian news, a couple of months ago, there was a challenge against the election results. And so we're going to have the results again because they were deemed not fair and, free and fair. So we're going to have that. And so actually in some ways that political upheaval is in many ways bigger issue than COVID. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about the background on energy. Electricity access is about 10% of the population that has got access. But about 80%, 85% of the nation lives in rural areas where very, very few people have got electricity. And so there's an increasing focus on off-grid solutions. And, these are microgrids and lanterns and things like that. But I would like to state here a bit of my position that I believe that off-grid should include cook stoves as well. So just to say, put that out there. So in terms of my discussion today, there are three sort of main providers for solar energy products. The sector itself, the energy sector in Malawi, is very dependent on donors. In any case, there are mini grids, and mini grids are very, very much dependent on donors. Even the one that's supposed to be almost independent of donors still gets about 40% of its funding from donors. Then you have formally contracted solar lantern or solar product providers, and these are they're typically solar lanterns, both pay as you go and cash for products. as well as solar home systems. And these, when I say formally contracted, I mean they have a contract with a supplier or a manufacturer, and exclusively or typically exclusively distribute their products, and they've got a contract, a memorandum of understanding for supply and how they interact with customers and how their results are dealt with. Then you've got independent private retailers who are your women and men, typically much lower income than the formally contracted distributors, and they go typically to China to import these, sometimes to South Africa, bring them in and sell them in their kiosk or door to door. And these have had slightly different experiences of the COVID situation. And they also have slightly different experiences with how they look at gender. Just as an example, mini grids, because the donor will typically have a gender component that they are supposed, whether they believe it or not, they are supposed to implement. With formally contracted lanterns, it varies depending on whether they are in a one-to-one memorandum of understanding with a private supplier, or whether there's a little bit of donor financing, in which case there's often a gender component and a formal gender component. And independent retailers, it's not formal gender sort of project component. But they do tend to interact in different ways with women and men, of course. Next slide, please. What has been the impact of COVID on solar providers? I mean, in Malawi, one of the things, like I said, there's no lockdown, so the differences in experiences, the experiences are quite different. And there's also there is also very few confirmed cases, which puts a limit, or which decreases maybe the amount of society withdrawal, as I call it, when you compare with other countries. In any case, the impact for the solar providers also depends on the model that they are using, as well as the location they are in, and of course a bit of luck. For formally contracted providers that we've talked to, the first thing they experienced was a slight increase in demand of solar lanterns, especially ones with phone chargers. And there were two reasons for this. One is that the COVID period, as we are in now, has coincided with the harvest period or the post-harvest period. So the customers, typically farmers or civil servants, but with a farm, they have more cash at the moment. They have cash to spend on these products than they'll typically have in a year. But the second thing that they noted, especially in urban areas, was that people would come to buy products because they were preparing for lockdown, or in quite a number of these were sort of middle income to upper middle who were buying these products for their mothers or their relatives, because they're expecting a lockdown and we're hoping that their relatives wouldn't have to be traveling every now and then to charge phones and to deal with that. And a few of those as well, looking at, we're entering a dry period and we're going to have power cuts, and power cuts this year, you don't want to have no light because of the COVID. So sort of a mix of things there. Solar mini grids have largely remained operational. There've been a couple of activities that have been postponed because of reliance on technical support from abroad. So especially solar mini grids being donor supported, they tend to have a lot of backstopping from foreign consultants. And when that is not available, then because of travel bans around the world, or need for quarantine, or fears of being stuck in a weak health system, then there's been postponement of activities, but nothing major, except maybe for sort of one project that was at the start and might have a significant delay in how it starts. For independent solar products, and to a lesser extent the formally contracted producers, one of the problems has been that the cost of transport has really impacted because they can't directly or they can't very easily transfer those costs to the customer. So that's sort of affecting their profitability. And they lack safety cushions. So for example, with the mini grids and with the formally contracted providers, especially if there's a donor involved, they're beginning to enter into agreements of, okay, when people cannot pay because they're, let's say, COVID stressed, how do we deal with this? And they're beginning to develop, okay, let's say they can delay, or let's provide some sort of social component to the lending system so that people are not overly stressed. But for purely private providers, of course, they don't have this, and there has been a loss of business there. They, because they are very much afraid of, what will happen, and they cannot necessarily give loans. Some of them are extending loans, especially if they know the people personally, but again, they have to be very sort of careful with that. One of the things that has come across.
Sorry, Maggie, you have 3 minutes. Sorry for interrupting. Okay. 3 minutes.
Okay, one of the things is that there's been a general disruption in the flow of goods and services because of inability to import product. Next slide, please. For customers, there's been competing demands. People have had to pay for different products, being asked to pay for more soap and buckets and things like that, and that makes it problematic for them to pay. The price increases of basic goods has also been an issue. And beyond lighting and communication, solar mini grids have not really provided much resilience for the effects of COVID. And what I mean by that, okay, people have communication, which is both good and fake news, and they have lighting, but it doesn't really provide, for example, for power to have fridge to stockpile so that you're not necessarily traveling to buy food, just as an example. And of course, we anticipate a bit of a regression in the efforts to increase energy access because of potential for reduced funding from donors that are themselves stressed, reduced capacity from customers to pay, and of course, delays in importation. Next slide, please. We'll not talk much about this slide because I've got 3 minutes left, but just to say that in Nepal, when they had the earthquake, a lot of people died, and most of the systems were destroyed and supply chains were disrupted and cut off. And in some ways, this sort of reflects some of the anticipated impacts of COVID that might have, the disruption of services in particular, not necessarily the disruption of micro hydro systems, but a general disruption of energy systems. And next slide, please. Yes. So one of the things that was learned, I think, from the Nepal experience, one was that most men were out of the country as migrant workers, which left much of the burden on women, which in places like Malawi, and I know in other places in Africa, is a comparable situation where you've got a lot of women at home and men have migrated. But what we see for Malawi, we see that off-grid itself is part of the resilience. So, people can have access to information and things like that, but it's also a two-sided coin, because to deal with disparate, dispersed systems is much more complicated, and to provide for all their needs is much more complicated than to just deal with one central system. They do provide an adaptive capacity, so they help communities adapt. But these are not so much the individual system like the lighting systems, but systems such as, if you have productive use of energy, of course, then people can earn some money even if the market is low. When it bounces back, they have something to get an income from. When energy was supplied to public institutions, either post-recovery or before the earthquake in Nepal, it did help resilience much more than just individual systems, because people could still access critical services, water, education, and health. Another issue is the importance of social safety nets, whether these are cash transfers or products. In Nepal, for example, there's a very rapid deployment of individual like solar lanterns and things like that, which helped in the recovery effort. In Malawi, just another disaster that happened more recently was the flooding, where we had social safety nets, and after the floods, they combined the social safety nets, which is a cash transfer of about $15 a month or $8 a month, depending on which donor you are connected to. But they started combining that with a cook stove to help communities recover. In both Malawi and Nepal, post-earthquake in Nepal and post-flooding in Malawi, women were very critical to repairing infrastructure and to community recovery. Some of those were skills gained before the shock or the disasters themselves, but also during the recovery, there was a concerted effort to include women. In some cases, because the donors had no choice, men had gone looking for a job, so they had women left, but they played a critical role in helping recovery. Next slide, please. Yeah. One of the things we keep seeing is a lack of coordination. You get pockets of what I call pockets of plenty and pockets of none, where donors tend to concentrate on certain areas, either that are geographically reachable or that have relations with already with the community, but that leaves other villages completely alone without any support. And this keeps sort of repeating itself in much of these sort of recovery efforts after major shocks or major disasters. Lack of sustainability, and that is to say, when the disaster happens or when the shock, as in COVID shock, happens, immediately after there's a lot of interest for the next 6 months or a year, if you're lucky, then everybody moves out. And we see that quite a lot in the energy space. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But also just to say that when this disaster happens, there are dynamics in gender that are atypical, that happen, that are not always in consideration. So, for example, in Nepal, we found that because of destruction of houses, people started living with parents-in-law. And there was no consideration in designing projects that how do we deal with these women that are living with parents-in-law and have lost even more power. In Malawi, what we're seeing is a shifting of the burden. So most of the middle class people can self-isolate to an extent. And when they want to go to the markets and things like that, they will send a domestic worker, most often a maid, a woman, but sometimes a poor man, who then takes, in a way, the risk is transferred to them. But there's not much support for that. I've got 2 sentences and I'll be done. We also see that solar, I know this is about solar, but we see that with mini grids or off-grid, when you say off-grid energy, for me, it means everything that is not on the central grid. But typically what that means for people is lighting or mini grid, and cooking keeps being left out. And that in particular is detrimental to women because they're chiefly responsible for that. And so that's also one of the lessons we've learned, that in such disasters, people very easily deal with lighting, but seem to forget water supply and cooking energy, as well as heating in areas where it's cold in winter. Thank you very much. I think that's my last sentence.
Okay, Maggie, thank you so much for your presentation and highlighting all those issues and the perspective from Malawi. I think you've raised the contextual issues of how politics, COVID-19 and energy intersect, and also the issue of safety nets. I think you've raised that as well. So thank you for that. We don't have much time, but I can see a very healthy conversation happening on the side chat. We have about 5 minutes to the end of the webinar, and I would like to give our speakers maybe 1 minute and 20 seconds each to just respond to the questions that are still outstanding. I have seen you've responded to quite a number of them. So we start with Lillian. Anything that you haven't responded to, and then just 1 minute, and then we move on to the next person.
Thank you. I've responded to almost the question that was addressed to me on the side.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Lilian.
You're welcome.
Benny. Benny, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there a question for me?
I think I had seen one question for you, but I think it looks like you've responded to it. If there is none other that is outstanding, then maybe we can now move to Chandi.
Hello. Yes, I saw two questions. One from on the health facilities in rural areas that are not electrified. I think from Jackie Musonda, which I've just responded to. And I also saw a question from Henrietta, which was also asking about the rural communities, the rural health facilities, whether they are also empowered or whether they have capacity to handle COVID if it affects them. The lucky bit so far is that there have been no cases in the two areas that we're talking about. And what I know is that the government of Zimbabwe has set up at least district centers which have been with staff that have been trained to respond to COVID. So the rural health centers are more trained to identify the cases and refer them. I think that's all I can say for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Chandi. So Dr. Maggie, I don't see any questions for you, but you may take a minute and give some closing remarks from your side.
Well, there's a question about what the government has done in electrified villages, and like in Zim, there's been training of health staff to go to those villages, to go nationwide actually, to deal with COVID. The other strategies is decongesting hospitals, which has again two sides, because one hospital is actually calling for pregnant women to go back to their hospital, whilst the government is calling for patients to get out of the hospital. So a bit of a problem there. But really, energy in a way is the least of their problems in the health centers. In Malawi, one of the biggest problems that people are facing is the protective equipment. And of course, disinfecting facilities. They're trying to put buckets, the touch-free buckets that have been going around. Maybe you've seen some of these on social media in rural hospitals. But other than that, there is not much, especially directly connected to energy.
Okay. And Maggie, yes, I've seen another question from Jackie in Zambia, asking specific to Malawi and Zimbabwe, whether there are any innovative appliances being considered for, as part of gender and social inclusion.
For COVID specifically, I would say not really. I mean, there's like I say, there's a sort of a hands-free bucket where you use pedals, and but obviously that doesn't solve the problem that some woman has to go to collect the water to fill the main upper bucket, which then drips out.
I don't think it's about COVID. It's more it's about energy. Any innovative appliances probably to ease the burden of labor from a gender perspective.
Not really. There's a lot of I think the main thing is the cooking appliances, the heaters on Baula, the mat stove that has become quite popular, is the main thing that's being distributed in general in the energy sector. But there are now discussions to start thinking beyond that. So one of the projects that's emerging in one area, which has got a mini grid and has got excess power, so a very unique situation, it's had excess power for the last 7 years, is to bring in, and people have also requested, is to bring in electric cooking. So there's a project to introduce efficient cooking and also electric pressure cookers, low-cost electric pressure cookers. And also that project has got a milling machine and is going to start water pumping. But most of that water pumping is actually going to irrigation, so it's not exactly serving women's needs, but it's serving men's needs, who are typically the main owners of irrigated land. Some women are, but they sort of have to be supported to do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. If there is no other comment from the speakers, I think I would like to thank everybody for joining us, for the vibrant conversations on the chat on the side, and for your time. I think I will bring it to a close at this point. Thank you very much. And I think, as Victor mentioned, the presentations and will be availed later. So thank you. Victor?
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a great conversation so far, I think. I hope that a lot of you can take some lessons from this. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available to those who might be interested. I know there is usually requests for the presentations as well, and so we'll find a way to best be able to share that with everybody else. There was a short poll that was on the comment section. If you scroll up the comment section, there was a short poll for the participants to just give us some brief feedback. If you can, before you step out, just take a minute to click on whatever and submit a vote, and tell us what you think we could do better in terms of these webinars, because this is the second in a series of 3. The last one being focused in East Africa, sorry. So if you don't mind, you can also just give us comments in the comment section with regards to what you think we should do to make it better, or what other topics you think we should cover. But all in all, thank you very much, and we hope to see you on the third webinar, which is the last of this series on gender and social inclusion in East Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.